She walked into Amazon MGM Studios that morning thinking it would be just another routine meeting. Another pitch, another handshake, another nod from Hollywood's top brass. But by the time she left, everything she had worked for, every deal she had ever signed, every door she thought was open in Hollywood, felt like it had slammed shut, hard, irrevocably. What had started as a career-defining opportunity had quickly turned into a career-ending nightmare. And the person at the center of it all wasn't a rival actress or a scandal-mongering tabloid. No, it was Jennifer Salke, the most feared, most respected, and most unrelenting executive in all of Hollywood. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine for a moment walking into a room where power is concentrated in one person so completely that the air itself seems to shift. Every assistant, every producer, every staff member knew the rules. Jennifer Salke doesn't tolerate nonsense. She doesn't sugarcoat. She doesn't play favorites, even if the person sitting across from her had once been the golden child of Hollywood royalty. Meghan Markle, fresh from her high-profile Netflix deal debacle and months of media scrutiny, believed her charm, her fame, and her carefully curated image could shield her. But charm, fame, and image mean nothing when confronted with someone like Salke. It started the moment Meghan stepped into the conference room. The room itself seemed to shrink around her, the high ceilings pressing down, the polished wood and minimalist decor suddenly oppressive. She could feel eyes on her, the staff pretending not to stare, the assistants taking meticulous notes, the security standing silently in the background. All of them knew that this meeting was not ordinary. They had seen Salke in action before. They had witnessed careers rise and fall with a single sentence from her mouth. And Meghan, despite her years in the public eye, despite her experience in front of cameras and in boardrooms, suddenly felt small. Have you ever been in a situation where every instinct screams danger, but every rational thought insists you're safe? That was Meghan at that moment. She had prepared meticulously. Talking points rehearsed, potential rebuttals drafted, charm polished to perfection. She believed she could navigate the Shark Tank. But she underestimated the depth of Salke's insight, her ability to see through personas, to pierce through layers of pretense, and to expose the uncomfortable truth that everyone else was too polite, or too afraid, to say. The first few seconds of the meeting were calm. Polite greetings, standard industry pleasantries, and the kind of scripted smiles you see in Hollywood boardrooms every day. Meghan tried to read Salke's mood, to gauge whether this would be a routine discussion or a subtle power play. And then it happened. Salke leaned back, her gaze unwavering, the kind of gaze that makes people squirm even when they're confident. She paused just long enough for the silence to become heavy, almost tangible, and then she spoke. What she said next was not just unexpected, it was devastating. Words that cut through the layers of Hollywood diplomacy, words that didn't just critique a project or a pitch, but questioned Meghan's very place in the industry. Every line Meghan had rehearsed, every confident smile, every polite nod, none of it mattered. Salke's words were precise, calculated, and merciless. They weren't just criticism, they were a verdict. And the verdict was clear. Your time in this industry, at this level, is over. You might be wondering, how could one meeting, one conversation, one person have such an impact? The answer lies in Hollywood's invisible power structures. It's not the actors, the celebrities, or even the public who dictate who succeeds or fails. It's the executives, the people in the shadows who hold the contracts, the green lights, the budgets, the cameras, and the trust of the networks and studios. And Jennifer Salke sits at the pinnacle of that power. She is the gatekeeper, the ultimate decision-maker, the person whose word can elevate a career overnight or crush it just as fast. Meghan had faced criticism before. She had been scrutinized by the press, dissected by tabloids, analyzed by armchair critics across the globe. But criticism from Jennifer Salke was different. This wasn't about headlines or public opinion. This was a direct, personal evaluation from someone whose influence could not be overstated. Salke's words didn't just sting. They carried weight, authority, and a consequence that Meghan could not escape. Every producer, every studio head, every casting director would hear about this meeting. And in Hollywood, reputation is everything. What makes this story even more shocking is the contrast between Meghan's expectation and the reality she faced. She had come prepared to pitch her ideas, to charm her way into new projects, to reaffirm her status as a rising, or in her mind, reigning, Hollywood star. Instead, she found herself in a cold, surgical dissection of her career, her choices, and her perceived missteps. And Sock didn't stop at professional critique. She made observations about Meghan's approach, her interactions, and her decision-making in a way that left no room for rebuttal. Every statement, every question, every subtle implication was carefully orchestrated to expose vulnerability. It's important to understand the stakes here. This wasn't just about one failed pitch. This wasn't about one project being declined. This was a public execution of career credibility. In Hollywood, perception is reality. When someone like Sock signals that a person is no longer viable, the industry listens. Projects dry up, endorsements vanish, networks close doors, and agents start looking for alternatives. For Meghan, who had relied heavily on her fame and media narrative to secure opportunities, this was an existential threat. And yet, what makes this story compelling isn't just the confrontation itself. It's the human element, the pride, the ambition, the belief that hard work and star power could shield anyone from judgment. Meghan entered that room with confidence. She believed in her brand, in her ability to navigate media storms, in her understanding of public perception. But what happened next revealed the harsh reality. In Hollywood, no brand, no fame, no title can withstand the scrutiny of someone who holds absolute power over opportunities. Have you ever wondered what it feels like when the narrative you've built around yourself, carefully curated, polished for public consumption, is dismantled in front of you? To see a single person unravel your professional identity with a calm, unwavering authority? That was Meghan Markle's reality that day. Every instinct, every strategy, every calculation she had relied upon failed to protect her, and the fallout would not remain private. In Hollywood, whispers become headlines, rumors become industry consensus, and a single executive's opinion can echo across every boardroom. Even now, months later, insiders are still talking about the meeting. They recount Sock's demeanor, her precise language, the way she paused to let each word sink in. They talk about Meghan's reactions, initial shock, attempts to regain composure, fleeting moments of defiance, and ultimately, the dawning realization that she had no shield, no backup plan, no escape. It's a moment frozen in time, a pivot point that changed not just Meghan's immediate opportunities, but potentially her entire career trajectory. And as you're watching this video, you might ask yourself, what exactly did Sock say? What words could have such an impact? What was revealed that no one had anticipated? And perhaps most importantly, could Meghan recover from this? Or had her Hollywood story truly come to an end? These questions will guide us through the next chapters as we explore the confrontation in detail, the fallout behind closed doors, and the ripple effect across Hollywood. She thought she was walking into just another routine meeting, the kind she had rehearsed a dozen times in her mind. Meghan Markle, poised, polished, and seemingly unshakable, strode into Amazon MGM studios with the confidence of someone accustomed to cameras, applause, and carefully orchestrated public appearances. But confidence can be deceptive. In Hollywood, especially at the level where Jennifer Sock operates, it isn't enough to be charming, talented, or famous. Here, power is absolute, and Sock's presence could make even the most celebrated stars feel insignificant. From the moment Meghan stepped into the conference room, there was a subtle but unmistakable shift in the air. The high ceilings, sleek glass walls, and modern minimalist decor seemed to press down, as if the room itself recognized the magnitude of what was about to unfold. Assistants adjusted their posture, producers exchanged brief, knowing glances, and the security team maintained a silent but palpable vigilance. Meghan tried to mask her apprehension with a practiced smile, hoping to command the room with her presence. But the truth is, she was unprepared for the intensity that was coming. Have you ever entered a room and felt like every eye was assessing you, dissecting your every move? That was Meghan at that moment. Every subtle glance, every twitch of a finger, every breath she took seemed to carry weight. The stakes were unimaginable. One wrong move could not only derail this meeting, but potentially unravel her entire career. And at that instant, she had no idea just how high those stakes truly were. Jennifer Sock entered quietly, but with a presence that demanded attention. She didn't need to speak. The room recognized her authority instantly. Her gaze swept across the conference table, landing on Meghan with a mix of curiosity and scrutiny, the kind that makes people feel exposed even when they're confident. The first few seconds were deceptively calm. Polite greetings were exchanged, small talk attempted, and the kind of carefully scripted smiles common to high-level Hollywood meetings were deployed. But anyone who has ever been in a room with Sock knows that the calm is always temporary. And then Sock spoke. Her words were precise, deliberate, and uncompromising. They weren't just feedback, they were a verdict. Meghan had come prepared with talking points, pitches, and charm strategies, but none of it mattered. Sock's words pierced through the layers of image and persona that Meghan had cultivated over the years. There was no room for negotiation, no space for rebuttal, and certainly no tolerance for excuses. Every observation Sock made was calculated to expose weakness and challenge the narrative Meghan had so carefully constructed. What's remarkable about this confrontation is not just the content of the criticism, but the delivery. Sock didn't yell. She didn't gesticulate wildly. She didn't need to. Her voice, calm and unwavering, carried a weight far greater than any raised tone could achieve. It was the kind of authority that silences a room, freezes time, and forces even the most self-assured individuals to reassess their position. Meghan felt it immediately, a sinking realization that charm, fame, and preparation were useless in the face of absolute authority. The meeting escalated quickly. Sock questioned Meghan's judgment, her choices, and her approach to the projects she had been involved with. She highlighted missteps, inconsistencies, and what she considered to be lapses in professionalism. Meghan attempted to interject, to clarify, to defend herself, but every attempt was met with measured, dismissive responses that made her feel both small and exposed. Imagine years of public acclaim, awards, and media praise reduced in moments to a series of uncomfortable silences and pointed critiques. That is the power of Jennifer Sock. And it wasn't just the words that struck. It was the timing, the emphasis, and the subtle but unmistakable undercurrent that Meghan was on the verge of professional annihilation. Every pause, every glance from Sock reinforced the message. Your status, your fame, your carefully built narrative, all of it could not shield you from this assessment. For anyone watching, it would have been clear. Meghan Markle, despite all her prior successes, was facing one of the most consequential moments of her career. Have you ever witnessed a situation where someone's entire future hangs in the balance, and every second feels like an eternity? That is precisely what Meghan experienced. She had navigated media storms, paparazzi invasions, and public scrutiny before. She had faced tabloid attacks and social media outrage. But this was different. This was private, internal, and irrevocably influential. Sock's words were not for the public. They were for those who controlled the fate of Hollywood careers. And once they were spoken, the ripples could not be undone. The conversation took a darker turn as Sock began to question Meghan's interpersonal relationships on set, her reliability, and her ability to collaborate with production teams. These were areas that, in Hollywood, can make or break opportunities. Even minor missteps can become magnified, amplified by the network of agents, producers, and executives who share insider knowledge. And Sock, with her unparalleled understanding of this ecosystem, made it clear that Meghan's reputation had been carefully observed and evaluated, and found wanting. As Meghan tried to respond, a mix of disbelief and defiance flashing across her face, Sock's demeanor remained steady. There was no room for emotional appeals, no space for negotiation. Every argument Meghan made, every defense, was met with cool, calculated responses that underscored her vulnerability. It was a masterclass in authority and control, and Meghan, despite her experience in public life, was completely unprepared for it. By the end of the meeting, Meghan was not just shaken. She was forced to confront the terrifying possibility that her career could be effectively ended in a single afternoon. Deals were in jeopardy, opportunities evaporating, and the carefully constructed Hollywood persona she had relied upon was under assault. It was a moment of reckoning, not just professionally but personally, as Meghan had to grapple with the realization that power, in the hands of someone like Sock, could override fame, charm, and public favor. And yet, even as Meghan left the room, there were whispers among the staff, subtle glances, and quiet exchanges that hinted at even more revelations yet to come. This meeting, while devastating in itself, was only the beginning. Behind closed doors, in corridors, and through private channels, the story of what had transpired would begin to spread, creating ripples that would affect not just Meghan's immediate projects, but her entire trajectory in Hollywood. So, as you consider this moment, ask yourself, how does someone survive when the very people controlling opportunities turn against them? When one conversation, one judgment, one person's assessment carries the weight to undo years of work? Meghan Markle had just experienced it firsthand, and what came next would shock the industry, the media, and the public alike. If Meghan thought she understood the power dynamics of Hollywood, she was about to learn a lesson that no amount of fame, awards, or carefully crafted image could teach. Jennifer Sock isn't just another executive. She is the architect behind some of Hollywood's most successful projects, the invisible hand shaping careers, and the ultimate arbiter of who gets to rise and who gets cut down. To understand why Meghan's confrontation with Sock was so devastating, you first need to understand exactly who Jennifer Sock is and why her reputation strikes fear into even the most seasoned actors and producers. Sock's career is the stuff of Hollywood legend. Rising through the ranks with a combination of strategic brilliance and unrelenting ambition, she carved out a space where her decisions carried unparalleled weight. She is not the type to tolerate flattery or excuses. Her evaluations are meticulous, and her standards are exacting. Over the years, she has been responsible for greenlighting massive successes, turning unknown talent into household names, and, just as swiftly, dismantling the careers of those who failed to meet her exacting expectations. Have you ever heard the phrase, "One word from the right person can change everything"? In Hollywood, that person is Jennifer Sock. Her opinion can turn a project from a guaranteed hit into a non-starter, and her criticism can make even the most famous stars reconsider their next steps. She operates with a calm authority that is almost surgical. There's no yelling, no dramatics, just a measured delivery that carries absolute consequence. And for someone like Meghan Markle, who had grown accustomed to public adoration and media-driven power, this was an entirely different realm of influence, one she had never truly navigated before. Those who have worked with Sock often describe an initial sense of awe. There is a magnetic authority to her presence. The moment she walks into a room, attention shifts. Executives straighten in their seats, assistants adjust their posture, and even the most confident producers pause to recalibrate their approach. It's not intimidation in the conventional sense. It's a recognition of power, competence, and vision. Sock has built her career on the ability to spot talent, potential, and risk with unmatched precision. And more importantly, she holds the cards. Careers, budgets, deals, opportunities, they are all within her purview. In Meghan's case, Sock's reputation alone should have been a warning. Word travels fast in Hollywood, and stories of Sock's decisive actions are legend. She has been credited with turning floundering projects into billion-dollar successes. Conversely, she has been feared for ending collaborations with high-profile talent whose behavior, professionalism, or approach she deemed unfit. There is no middle ground. You are either aligned with her vision and standards, or you are considered a liability. And unfortunately for Meghan, this meeting revealed that she had crossed that invisible line without even realizing it. What makes Sock particularly formidable is her ability to see beyond public image. She can separate media hype from real capability. She doesn't rely on social media presence, press coverage, or fan loyalty to judge a person's value. She looks at results, professionalism, and how someone operates under pressure. And in this, Meghan was uniquely vulnerable. Meghan had spent years cultivating an image of perfection, of charisma, of star power. She had relied on public perception to shield her from criticism. But Sock doesn't care about perception. She cares about performance, accountability, and the real-world impact of a person's actions. There is a certain irony here. Meghan, who had mastered the art of public messaging, of controlling narrative, suddenly found herself exposed. Sock's reputation for seeing through facades meant that every carefully constructed layer of Meghan's persona was vulnerable. The polished confidence that had served her in front of cameras now seemed superficial. Every hesitation, every pause, every carefully crafted argument was scrutinized, dissected, and measured against standards Meghan hadn't fully understood until that moment. Hollywood insiders have whispered about Sock's interactions with talent for years. Stories circulate of meetings where actors, producers, and executives left shaken, humbled, or completely blindsided. Unlike the tabloids or social media scandals Meghan was accustomed to, these confrontations are private, influential, and permanent. When Sock evaluates someone, it is not just an opinion, it becomes a benchmark. The industry listens. Decisions are made. Opportunities shift. Careers pivot. And for Meghan, who had relied heavily on her visibility and reputation, this was an awakening to a level of accountability she had never experienced. Sock's reputation is also built on her strategic ruthlessness. She understands timing, optics, and the long-term impact of her decisions. A single meeting, a single critique, or even a subtle observation can ripple through Hollywood in ways few executives can manage. She doesn't need to publicly denounce someone for her words to carry weight. Producers, agents, and other executives are attuned to her judgments. Her influence doesn't stop at Amazon MGM studios. It extends across networks, production companies, and even talent agencies. Imagine the pressure Meghan must have felt. Here she was, standing across from someone whose opinion could literally define her next decade, or end it. She had faced media storms before, public scandals, and tabloid attacks, but this was fundamentally different. This was an internal evaluation from someone whose authority was unquestioned, whose influence was absolute, and whose judgment was final. There was no appeal, no mediator, and no public court of opinion to sway the outcome. Sock's assessment was a verdict in itself. The fear and respect that Sock commands are not accidental. They are cultivated through years of decisive action and visible results. She has built an aura of infallibility that few dare to challenge. Even those who admire her accomplishments know that crossing her, or failing to meet her expectations, carries real risk. This is the environment Meghan stepped into, a world where the rules are invisible, the stakes are enormous, and the consequences are immediate. Have you ever been in a position where one person's assessment can determine your entire future? That is exactly what Meghan faced. She had navigated international media scrutiny, royal family politics, and public adoration, but none of that prepared her for a boardroom confrontation with Jennifer Sock. For the first time, Meghan realized that Hollywood power doesn't reside in fans, cameras, or social media followers. It resides in the executives who hold the keys to projects, opportunities, and influence, and Sock was the ultimate gatekeeper. And yet, there is a paradox in Sock's reputation. While feared, she is also respected, admired, and trusted. She rewards talent, diligence, and professionalism with unprecedented opportunities. She builds careers, invests in projects, and is celebrated for her visionary decisions. But that respect is earned, and it comes with exacting standards. You cannot coast on fame or charm alone. You cannot rely on public image to shield you from scrutiny. Meghan had learned this the hard way. This is why her meeting with Sock was more than a confrontation. It was an awakening. It wasn't just about a single pitch or project. It was about the realization that Hollywood operates on a level of accountability, scrutiny, and influence that few understand until they are directly confronted by it. Sock's reputation preceded her, and it delivered an undeniable truth. In this industry, perception is fleeting, power is concentrated, and one wrong move can change everything. And as Meghan sat across from Sock, trying to maintain composure, she began to understand something crucial. This wasn't just a critique. This was a warning. This was a test of her resilience, her understanding of the industry, and her capacity to navigate power at its highest levels. Every word, every glance, every subtle gesture carried layers of meaning that Meghan could not ignore. The stakes were immediate, personal, and professional, and the outcome could determine whether she would continue to be a player in Hollywood or become a cautionary tale. But what Meghan didn't yet realize was that Sock's influence extended far beyond this room. The ripples of this meeting would reach colleagues, competitors, networks, and projects Meghan had not even considered. And while Meghan had faced public criticism before, nothing had prepared her for the strategic, quiet, and devastating authority that Jennifer Sock wielded. By the time Meghan Markle walked into Amazon MGM studios to face Jennifer Sock, she was no stranger to the glinting, often treacherous world of Hollywood power dynamics. For years, she had navigated celebrity culture, casting offices, media scrutiny, and high-stakes negotiations. But what she hadn't anticipated was how differently someone like Sock wielded influence compared to anyone she had encountered before. This chapter delves into Meghan's history with Hollywood power players, the relationships she had built and strained, and how these past interactions set the stage for the confrontation that would come to define her career. From her early acting days in Canada to the international spotlight she gained on Suits, Meghan learned quickly that Hollywood is both a kingdom and a battlefield. Every role, audition, and meeting carried stakes far beyond what one might imagine from the outside. A single misstep could ripple through an actor's career, creating lost opportunities and shifting reputations. She had experienced minor clashes with producers, subtle disagreements with showrunners, and whispered critiques from industry insiders. Each of these experiences had trained her to be resilient, but they were only the warm-up for what awaited her with Sock. Consider her time on Suits. While she was praised for her talent, charm, and dedication, Meghan also encountered the subtle politics that every successful show harbors. Decisions were influenced by more than merit. Hierarchy, alliances, and influence played enormous roles. She learned that relationships with producers, network executives, and studio heads could dictate the trajectory of a series or an actor's career. She saw colleagues rise and fall based not solely on talent, but on how well they navigated the complex web of expectations, loyalty, and perceived professionalism. Meghan's interactions with power players were a mix of strategy, diplomacy, and sometimes miscalculation. For every successful negotiation, there were lessons learned the hard way, moments when she misread intent, underestimated scrutiny, or overestimated the goodwill she had earned. She had to develop a keen sense for reading people, anticipating reactions, and tailoring her approach to each individual. It was a delicate balance, assertiveness without arrogance, charm without vulnerability, and visibility without overexposure. She had also experienced the challenges of transitioning from television to global stardom. Once the spotlight widened, so did the stakes. Every public appearance, interview, or philanthropic endeavor became a reflection of not just her talent, but her brand, values, and perceived credibility. Hollywood power players are observant. They notice every nuance. They measure how someone handles success, criticism, and pressure. Meghan, with her carefully constructed persona, was acutely aware of these dynamics, yet even she hadn't realized the full measure of influence held by someone like Jennifer Sock. There were also moments of friction that foreshadowed future confrontations. Industry insiders had occasionally whispered about Meghan's approach to collaboration, her insistence on creative control, and her efforts to assert influence beyond what some executives considered appropriate. These instances were subtle but consequential. Hollywood is a networked ecosystem. Gossip travels fast, and perceptions, fair or not, have long-lasting effects. Meghan's past actions, choices, and patterns of negotiation would not be forgotten, and they would resurface at the most critical moments. One of the most significant aspects of Meghan's history with power players is her ability to attract attention, both positive and negative. She had mastered the art of creating a narrative, leveraging media coverage to shape public perception, and cultivating relationships with influential individuals. But this visibility was a double-edged sword. High-profile attention invited scrutiny, speculation, and criticism. And while she could manage media narratives, she could not always control the opinions of executives whose decisions carried immediate professional consequences. Her prior experiences also highlight a recurring tension in Hollywood, the clash between personal brand and professional expectations. Meghan's brand was one of ambition, global relevance, and influence. Hollywood executives, however, prioritize a combination of talent, reliability, and professional conduct. the two do not always align. In her past projects, she occasionally faced pushback for insisting on creative input or questioning conventional decisions. These moments, while minor in isolation, contributed to a reputation perceived by some as assertive, by others as challenging, that would later inform Sock's evaluation. Another factor in Meghan's history with power players was her approach to alliances and mentorships. Hollywood thrives on connections, and she had cultivated relationships with influential figures across networks, studios, and agencies. These relationships were strategic, offering guidance, opportunities, and occasionally protection. But in an environment where influence is concentrated, not all relationships hold equal weight. Sock, with decades of experience, was precisely the type of executive whose opinion could outweigh a network of supporters. Meghan's previous reliance on media-driven influence or sympathetic allies suddenly seemed insufficient. Her history also included lessons about perception versus reality. Meghan had observed colleagues whose reputations were bolstered by public narratives, only to see those narratives crumble under private scrutiny. She had learned that executives like Sock do not judge based on popularity or social media following. They assess capability, professionalism, and the ability to navigate complex interpersonal dynamics. In hindsight, some of Meghan's previous confrontations and missteps may have seemed minor, but they provided a framework for the scrutiny she faced in the Sock meeting. Have you ever realized that your past actions, even those you consider inconsequential, can influence how others perceive you in moments of high stakes? For Meghan, this realization came sharply. Every decision, from a subtle disagreement on set to a public statement made in interviews, became part of a cumulative record. Sock, with her keen perception and meticulous assessment style, would have noticed these patterns. And the question looming over Meghan was whether her history of navigating Hollywood power had prepared her for someone who operated on an entirely different level. This chapter of Meghan's career also underscores the unpredictability of Hollywood alliances. Friends, mentors, and allies may support you publicly, but when an executive like Sock makes a decision, those alliances can be tested. Meghan had learned to balance diplomacy, assertiveness, and strategic charm, yet none of that guaranteed protection. In this world, influence is concentrated, and the judgment of one powerful person can outweigh the support of many. By the time she entered the Sock meeting, Meghan had a mixed history of success, tension, and learning moments with Hollywood power players. She was skilled at navigating media narratives, adept at projecting confidence, and experienced in professional negotiation. Yet the environment she stepped into was unprecedented. Sock's authority, experience, and ability to assess talent and risk with precision placed Meghan in uncharted territory. The meeting was no longer just a professional evaluation. It was a reckoning with the realities of concentrated power, accountability, and the harsh standards of Hollywood executives. As Meghan faced Sock across the table, she likely reflected on this history. Her triumphs, her challenges, her careful navigation of relationships, and her occasional miscalculations. Every prior experience shaped her, but none fully prepared her for what was about to happen. She was about to encounter the full force of Hollywood authority personified in one individual, and the consequences would be immediate, profound, and unforgettable. What Meghan couldn't yet foresee was that Sock's knowledge of her history, combined with her unmatched executive authority, would create a perfect storm. One meeting, one conversation, one assessment would set in motion a sequence of events that would shock the industry, alter public perception, and leave Meghan questioning her place in Hollywood entirely. And as the room grew quieter, as tension thickened, and as the first words of confrontation were exchanged, the audience, and Meghan herself, was about to witness a moment that would define careers and reputations alike. She walked in expecting a standard discussion, a pitch meeting, a chance to present ideas, showcase her vision, and perhaps secure a new path forward in Hollywood after the turbulence of past deals. Meghan Markle had rehearsed this scenario countless times. She had prepared talking points, anticipated objections, and even planned responses to potential critiques. Yet, nothing could have prepared her for the intensity, precision, and unrelenting scrutiny that Jennifer Sock brought to the room that day. The air in the Amazon MGM Studios conference room was charged, almost electric, But it wasn't the kind of excitement Meghan had felt when walking onto a set or stepping onto a stage. This was a different energy, controlled, deliberate, and unervingly focused. Every movement Sock made seemed measured, intentional, and full of purpose. Her gaze swept across the room, landing on Meghan with a precision that made it immediately clear. This was not a meeting for pleasantries. This was an evaluation. Imagine the weight of being assessed by someone whose judgment could alter the course of your career in moments. Meghan's confidence began to waver, replaced by a creeping realization that charm, fame, and media influence would carry little weight here. Sock didn't rely on gossip, public opinion, or social media acclaim. She relied on her own observations, her vast experience, and an acute understanding of what it takes to succeed, or fail, in Hollywood's high-stakes environment. And Meghan was under the microscope. The conversation began innocuously enough. Sock posed questions about Meghan's vision, her projects, and her approach to collaboration. On the surface, they seemed straightforward. But with every question, there was an undertone. A subtle probe designed to expose weakness, inconsistency, or lack of preparation. Meghan responded with the poise she had perfected over years of public life, presenting her ideas clearly, confidently, and with what she believed was persuasive authority. But Sock's responses were calm, measured, and unyielding. Every answer Meghan offered seemed to invite deeper scrutiny rather than approval. Then came the first unmistakable signal that this meeting was no ordinary pitch. Sock leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing, and made an observation that cut through the polished exterior Meghan had so carefully cultivated. It wasn't a public insult. It wasn't a dramatic outburst. It was a precise, targeted critique that immediately put Meghan on the defensive. The kind of critique that makes you reassess every past interaction, every decision, and every assumption you've made about your professional competence. Have you ever been in a situation where someone's calm, deliberate words feel heavier than any shouting or anger could? That was the moment Meghan realized she was in uncharted territory. Sock's authority wasn't loud, it was absolute. Her evaluation didn't just assess a project, it assessed the person behind it, her judgment, her behavior, and her suitability for high-level collaboration. Every subtle inflection in Sock's voice reinforced the gravity of her critique, and Meghan could feel the room responding, not with words, but with an almost tangible shift in energy. As the dialogue intensified, Meghan attempted to defend herself, to clarify her decisions, to assert the value of her vision. But each interjection was met with an unflinching counter, delivered with the kind of precision that left no room for misinterpretation. Sock's questions were not casual inquiries. They were carefully constructed probes, designed to test Meghan's resilience, adaptability, and professionalism. Meghan's carefully prepared arguments, rehearsed in the solitude of hotel rooms and private offices, suddenly seemed fragile and inadequate. The stakes became immediately apparent. This was not a discussion about the merits of a single project or an isolated idea. This was a reckoning. Sock's words carried consequences, not just for the meeting itself, but for Meghan's reputation, future opportunities, and standing within the tightly interconnected world of Hollywood executives. One misstep, one falter, one poorly considered answer could have cascading effects, closing doors that Meghan had once assumed were open. The emotional intensity of the room escalated. Meghan's heartbeat quickened. Her thoughts raced, trying to anticipate Sock's next move, to find a way to regain control, to assert authority in a situation where the balance of power was unmistakably in Sock's favor. But the more Meghan tried to navigate the conversation strategically, the more Sock's precision seemed to unravel her carefully constructed narrative. Every attempt to steer the discussion back on her terms was met with calm, measured resistance. The power dynamics were clear. Sock was in command, and Meghan was being tested under pressure the likes of which she had not experienced before. Sock's critique was not solely professional. It was personal in its precision. She highlighted inconsistencies, questioned judgments, and dissected Meghan's approach to collaboration in a way that exposed vulnerabilities Meghan had previously concealed. She didn't belittle, she didn't yell. She simply articulated observations with clarity, authority, and unflinching accuracy. The effect was devastating. Meghan, who had relied on public acclaim, charm, and strategic alliances to navigate challenges, suddenly found that those tools were ineffective here. Hollywood insiders have likened moments like these to a psychological chess match. Sock's every word was a calculated move, assessing Meghan's responses, measuring her poise, and evaluating how she managed pressure. Meghan's previous experiences with media scrutiny, public critique, and professional negotiation had prepared her for many challenges, but not this. The intensity, subtlety, and absolute authority of Sock's approach created an environment in which Meghan was simultaneously tested, exposed, and evaluated. And then came the point of no return. Sock delivered a statement so precise, so cutting, that Meghan's confidence wavered visibly. It was a turning point in the meeting. A line that made her realize that this evaluation was not about minor corrections or constructive feedback. It was about assessing her professional viability at the highest level. This wasn't a simple critique. This was a verdict delivered with surgical precision. Have you ever felt the moment when your entire career is suddenly under scrutiny, and the person assessing you has the power to determine its future in real time? Meghan felt it, and it was terrifying. Her rehearsed talking points, her charm, her media-crafted persona, all of it suddenly felt insufficient. Every subtle facial expression, every micro-gesture, every carefully considered rebuttal was analyzed, measured, and tested against Sock's exacting standards. The room became a crucible in which Meghan's professional identity was being evaluated, and the outcome would shape the trajectory of her career for years to come. The confrontation escalated further as Sock began dissecting past choices, highlighting patterns, and pointing out behaviors that suggested risk to future collaborations. Meghan attempted to respond, to defend herself, to assert her vision. But each interjection was met with calm, unyielding rebuttals that underscored Sock's dominance. This was not a debate. It was an evaluation in which Sock held absolute authority. Every response Meghan offered seemed to invite deeper scrutiny rather than defuse the tension. By the time the meeting concluded, Meghan was left with the stark realization that her career trajectory could be irrevocably altered. She had walked in expecting a routine discussion and left facing a professional reckoning. The weight of Sock's assessment, the clarity of her judgment, and the authority with which it was delivered left no room for misinterpretation. It was a defining moment, a meeting that would be discussed in whispers across Hollywood for months to come. But what Meghan did not yet know was that the consequences of this confrontation were just beginning. The meeting was only the spark. Behind closed doors, the ripples would spread, influencing executives, producers, and agents across the industry. Projects would be reconsidered, alliances tested, and reputations recalibrated. And the full impact of Jennifer Sock's words would not be felt immediately. It would unfold in a series of devastating, career-defining moments that would leave Meghan questioning everything she thought she knew about Hollywood. By the time the room had quieted after the initial confrontation, Meghan Markle felt the weight of Jennifer Sock's scrutiny pressing down like a physical force. But what came next wasn't just an evaluation. It was a bombshell accusation that would leave Meghan stunned, scrambling for composure, and facing a reality she had never anticipated. This wasn't about a missed opportunity, a mismanaged project, or even a minor lapse in judgment. No, Sock's words went straight to the heart of Meghan's professional credibility, challenging her competence, her judgment, and ultimately, her place in Hollywood. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. Sock, with her characteristic calm authority, shifted the conversation from Meghan's current project proposals to her past conduct, her patterns of collaboration, and her professional reliability. The shift was seamless, but for Meghan, it was seismic. She had entered the meeting expecting to pitch, to charm, and to negotiate. She had rehearsed rebuttals for common objections, anticipated questions about budgets and timelines, and even prepared talking points to showcase her adaptability and strategic vision. But none of this could have prepared her for what Sock was about to say. Meghan, Sock began, her voice steady, measured, and precise. There are serious concerns about how you handle collaboration and manage professional relationships. On the surface, it seemed like a professional critique, the kind that executives often deliver to clarify expectations. But the room immediately sensed the gravity beneath the words. Sock didn't just voice a concern, she delivered a judgment, the kind that immediately shifted power dynamics. Meghan's eyes widened slightly, a micro-expression of disbelief and concern, as she realized this was not routine feedback. Sock's reputation for decisive, career-altering evaluations was well known, and this felt like the opening salvo of a verdict. Have you ever been accused of something that shakes the foundation of everything you've worked for, leaving you questioning whether all your effort, planning, and reputation could withstand it? That's exactly what Meghan felt in that moment. Her carefully constructed persona, polished, public-facing, and meticulously curated, suddenly felt fragile. The recognition that someone as powerful as Sock was assessing her not just for a project, but for her very ability to function at Hollywood's highest levels, was both terrifying and disorienting. Sock continued, her tone deliberate, highlighting patterns of behavior that, according to insiders, she had monitored over months. She questioned Meghan's approach to leadership, her handling of professional disagreements, and her perceived difficulties in navigating complex team dynamics. Every phrase was calculated to expose vulnerability while remaining within the bounds of professional discourse. It was a surgical dismantling of reputation, executed with precision that left no room for misinterpretation or defense. What made the accusation so devastating was its scope. This wasn't about a single misstep or an isolated incident. Sock framed her critique as part of a broader pattern, one that called into question Meghan's judgment across multiple projects and professional contexts. It was a comprehensive assessment that implied long-term consequences. If these patterns persisted, Meghan's ability to secure future opportunities at the highest levels would be severely compromised. For anyone familiar with Hollywood's networked ecosystem, this was effectively a career-altering declaration. Meghan attempted to respond, carefully choosing her words, emphasizing her past successes, and highlighting instances of professional collaboration where she had been praised. But Sock, with her unparalleled experience, anticipated these defenses. Each counterpoint Meghan offered was met with subtle, calm rebuttals that highlighted inconsistencies or misperceptions, reinforcing the impression that Meghan's previous successes could not shield her from this scrutiny. The dynamic in the room was clear. Meghan was on the defensive, and Sock held absolute authority. Have you ever been in a conversation where every response you give seems to make the other person's point stronger rather than weaker? That's what Meghan experienced. The more she tried to assert herself, the more the narrative Sock was constructing solidified. It was not a debate, it was a demonstration of power. Every word, gesture, and micro-expression was weighed, analyzed, and strategically addressed. Meghan's confidence, built over years of navigating public and professional scrutiny, felt increasingly inadequate under the precision of Sock's assessment. The bombshell accusation reached its peak when Sock explicitly questioned Meghan's reliability in high-pressure situations and her capacity to maintain productive, professional relationships with colleagues and collaborators. The implication was stark. Meghan's perceived behavior posed a risk to the projects, teams, and networks she sought to engage with. In Hollywood terms, this was a red flag of the highest order. It signaled to the room, to assistants, producers, and any observers, that Meghan's presence could complicate or jeopardize major projects. This moment was also emotionally shattering. Meghan's reactions, micro-expressions of disbelief, fleeting attempts at composure, subtle shifts in posture, did not go unnoticed. Sock's ability to read these cues and incorporate them into the assessment created an almost inescapable feedback loop. Meghan's vulnerability amplified the perceived validity of the critique. In other words, the emotional impact was not incidental. It was part of the professional evaluation. What made this accusation even more consequential was its timing. Meghan had recently endured public scrutiny from her Netflix deal fallout, with debates about her leadership, vision, and influence circulating in the media. Sock's assessment effectively compounded this scrutiny with authoritative internal judgment. It was no longer just the court of public opinion. It was the court of professional authority in Hollywood. And this court, unlike social media or tabloid coverage, held the power to redefine careers with immediacy and precision. Insiders later revealed that moments like these are what separate executives like Sock from the rest. While many in Hollywood rely on reputation, media presence, or industry buzz to inform their decisions. Sock relies on direct observation, experience, and strategic judgment. She doesn't evaluate talent in isolation. She evaluates the totality of their professional persona, including reliability, collaboration, judgment, and potential risk. For Meghan, this holistic evaluation was devastating, revealing vulnerabilities she had never confronted in such a direct, high-stakes setting. Sock's words hung in the air, heavy with implication. It was clear that this was not just feedback. It was a warning, a statement that Meghan's career trajectory was in jeopardy unless significant changes occurred. The room was silent, each participant acutely aware of the gravity of the situation. Meghan's carefully constructed defenses, polished persona, and media-acquired resilience were proving insufficient against this calibrated critique. Have you ever faced a moment where one conversation made you question your entire professional identity, leaving you wondering if all the work, relationships, and effort you had invested could withstand scrutiny? Meghan was experiencing that moment. Every instinct she had relied upon, charm, preparation, strategic framing, suddenly seemed inadequate. She was confronting the reality that, in Hollywood, perception, reputation, and authority converge in ways that can abruptly redefine one's trajectory. The bombshell accusation was more than just words. It was a seismic event in Meghan's career. It called into question her reliability, her judgment, and her ability to navigate Hollywood's complex network of relationships. It was precise, devastating, and delivered with the quiet authority that makes Jennifer Sock so uniquely powerful. For Meghan, the implications were immediate and profound. Doors that had previously seemed open now appeared to be closing, opportunities evaporating in ways that were invisible to the public but undeniable to industry insiders. And yet, as Meghan struggled to process the accusation, she could not know that the reverberations of this moment were only beginning. The implications of Sock's judgment would extend far beyond this meeting, influencing decisions, shaping perceptions, and altering opportunities in ways that would become apparent in the weeks and months to come. The industry, already abuzz with whispers and speculation, would soon have more to discuss, and the consequences for Meghan would continue to unfold in unpredictable, career-defining ways. The air in Amazon MGM studios was thick with tension, the kind that doesn't dissipate easily. Meghan Markle had just endured the bombshell accusation, a verdict delivered with surgical precision that left her reeling. But the confrontation with Jennifer Sock was far from over. Behind the polished walls of the conference room, in whispers, private messages, and quiet conversations, deeper truths began to surface, secrets that had been carefully hidden, calculated, and, in many cases, ignored by the public. This chapter reveals what happened behind closed doors, the private assessments, the industry murmurs, and the leaks that would amplify the impact of Sock's decisive critique. When the meeting concluded for the main attendees, Meghan expected a pause, a moment to regroup, a brief respite from scrutiny. She was wrong. As soon as she left the room, the ripples began. Executive assistants and producers, the silent witnesses of the meeting, had been carefully observing every interaction. In Hollywood, observation is currency, and in this instance, the room had recorded more than just words. It had captured patterns, reactions, and vulnerabilities. Each subtle glance, each micro-expression, and each hesitated response would later inform private discussions and strategic decisions about her career trajectory. Have you ever been in a room where every subtle reaction, every micro-expression, and every offhand remark could be used as evidence in a judgment that affects your entire future? That was Meghan in that moment. Behind the closed doors of Hollywood executives' offices, private conversations were already unfolding, dissecting her every word and gesture. Sock's influence extended far beyond her immediate presence. The people who observed, noted, and reported had the power to create a ripple effect that no public image or prepared response could counteract. Insiders later revealed that Sock's assessment went beyond the obvious critiques delivered in the room. Her team had been tracking Meghan's professional conduct across multiple projects, examining patterns of behavior that might indicate risk. These included instances where collaboration had been challenging, decisions were questioned, or communication with team members was misinterpreted. On the surface, some of these incidents seemed minor or even inconsequential. Yet in Hollywood, perception and pattern recognition are everything. A single executive like Salk can interpret these as indicators of reliability or the lack thereof. The exposure of these private insights was devastating because it revealed what many had suspected but few had dared to articulate publicly. Meghan's reputation, carefully curated in the media, was being contrasted against her behind-the-scenes professional conduct. What the public saw, a polished, charismatic figure, was only part of the equation. Salk and her team assessed Meghan based on real-world performance, reliability, and collaboration under pressure. And according to insiders, the findings were troubling. Patterns emerged that painted a picture of someone difficult to manage, someone whose high-profile status could complicate otherwise straightforward projects. These behind-the-scenes revelations were compounded by industry whispers. Hollywood thrives on stories, speculation, and insider information, and nothing spreads faster than the evaluation of someone with the visibility and profile of Meghan Markle. Within hours, subtle hints about the meeting circulated among producers, agents, and studio executives. Not in full detail. Confidentiality was observed, but enough to shape perceptions. Her professional reliability was questioned, her decision-making scrutinized, and her ability to collaborate cast into doubt. The seeds of a reputational crisis were being sown quietly, efficiently, and strategically. Imagine being in Meghan's shoes, standing on the precipice of an industry-altering moment, and realizing that your public narrative is being dissected, contradicted, and challenged behind closed doors. Every carefully rehearsed response, every media-trained statement, every charm-laden interaction suddenly felt insufficient. Behind closed doors, where real power is wielded, the rules are different. Influence is concentrated, and reputation can be dismantled with far greater efficiency than tabloids or social media ever could. Meghan was experiencing the full impact of that reality. Sources indicate that during these private assessments, Salk's team uncovered details about Meghan's prior professional interactions that, when framed in the context of risk and reliability, appeared highly problematic. These were moments that Meghan might have considered trivial or routine. Disagreements with producers, insistence on creative control, or subtle critiques of team decisions. In isolation, none of these might have seemed consequential. But when aggregated, analyzed, and interpreted by someone with Salk's experience, they formed a narrative that could influence decisions across multiple levels of Hollywood operations. The implications were immediate. A single executive's evaluation, bolstered by supporting observations, can influence casting decisions, project greenlights, and long-term collaborations. And in Meghan's case, the ripple effects were already beginning. Producers she had once worked with began reevaluating potential partnerships. Agents started considering alternative strategies. Even colleagues who admired her publicly were forced to reconsider their professional alignment. In a networked ecosystem like Hollywood, these subtle shifts accumulate rapidly, creating consequences that may be invisible to the public but devastating in effect. What makes this exposure particularly intense is the contradiction between Meghan's public persona and the private narrative emerging behind the scenes. To the world, she is charismatic, polished, and accomplished. To Salk and her inner circle, she is high-profile but potentially high-risk. This tension between perception and reality is a hallmark of Hollywood's hidden power structures. While fans and media may champion one version of a person, executives wield the power to define their professional viability. Meghan's confrontation with Salk revealed this dichotomy in stark relief, and it left her navigating a precarious space where public image offered no immunity. Furthermore, the private revelations illuminated aspects of Meghan's negotiation style and approach to collaboration that were interpreted as challenges to executive authority. Salk's team reportedly observed that Meghan often sought input, but when receiving feedback, she could appear defensive, strategic, or dismissive. In most industries, this might be viewed as assertiveness or advocacy. In Hollywood, however, perception of risk and manageability often outweigh raw talent or visibility. For Meghan, whose career had often relied on a combination of public admiration and media narratives, this was an awakening. The rules behind closed doors were starkly different. Even more, Insiders suggest that SOC's evaluation highlighted the potential for long-term implications. This was not a simple critique of a project or a fleeting moment of disagreement. It was a comprehensive analysis of patterns that could impact Meghan's ability to secure future projects, endorsements, or collaborations. Every minor tension, every repeated pattern of perceived defensiveness, every instance where influence or authority seemed to be questioned, became part of a cumulative judgment that had immediate and lasting consequences. And while Meghan grappled with the weight of this private scrutiny, she could not yet see the full ramifications. The industry, like a slow-moving tide, would absorb the signals, adjust perceptions, and alter opportunities. SOC's critique, combined with these private observations, effectively set the stage for a